Yay. Hi, Yvonne. So great to
Hello.
be here with you again.
Yes, it's fun, isn't it? I look forward to it tremendously. I don't know where we're going to go today, but it's an amazing subject.
I really like it myself. I've explored the word quite thoroughly over the years, gained some insight into what truth may be or not be, and I'm looking forward to having you open up if you feel to. There's so much conversation about it's true, it's not true, there are lies, there are anything other than the truth is a corruption of the truth. Where are we to go with this?
Well, it came up the other morning for me when I was doing my usual, 5:30 work and post, and I was, what is truth? And I was thought, well, there is no such thing. And I went, oh well, that's good. Um, and so I thought, "Gee, what an amazing subject, because when you look at the world today, everybody's waiting for the truth to be revealed. you know. And we're talking about the people like, people that have taken it upon themselves to play the role of truthers, as they're called now. I love these labels that come up, right? All these truthers, which means that they're meant to be telling the truth. And then it's like those people, they're telling lies, and then I thought, oh, but whose truth? What is truth? It's a really interesting subject to examine, because for me, what is my truth is only that which is in alignment with what I call my vibrational signature, that feels right. It feels in an expanded, opening experience. But then I am consciously aware now of being in that high vibration. So if I look at the old matrix where everybody's still, puddling around, in this belief it's either true or it's a lie, and it's either right or it's wrong, or it's good or it's bad, then they keep looking for the truth. And when you really, when I analyze that word, then I go, well, but I know that I look through the lens of my experiences and through the lens of my old conditioning and programming once upon a time, and that I call truth. So when I am looking for people to start telling the truth, because we're looking for these reveals, right? But is it true? It's not true for me. It's only true for the person that's experiencing it. So when I was looking at this subject, all that I got from my higher source was, well, there is no such thing as truth. There is just possibilities and experiences and whatever is in the moment, because it's only what's in the moment that is actually true for you. Might not be for you, for me, might not be for you. So it is one of those rabbit holes that you can go down forever. And when I look at how programmed and how conditioned we have become to start looking at mainstream, that box that at 6 o'clock every night pours out the news of so-called truth, with all the drama and what's happened. Somebody fell off their bike in Nova Scotia and cracked their skull, and it's like, oh dear, I've got to be careful next time I get on my bike, because I don't want to be like that person. And suddenly we make that person's truth or that person's experience then affect us, so that we have to alter something just in case that might happen to us. And so we have this crazy idea that you go, oh, did you hear? The drama, did you hear? Well, I don't know if that's true. Well, of course you don't know if it's true because you weren't there. And, and so I just really feel that the only truth that is for me is this moment, right here, right now. And everything else is a story.
Great. I love that you're going there, Yvonne, because it was just coming up for me. It's just the stories that we make up. And I've been so blessed to be in this beautiful constellation with beloved Colleen. And she's brought so much awareness around what story really is, the stuff we make up, the evidence we look outside for to kind of fuel our biases or our stories about what we want to profess as truth so that we can maybe feel a little bit more safer in the world or a little bit more secure or a little bit more identified as a person that solidly knows what he or she is talking about. And I have these funny ways to come across really convincingly. And then she's a couple of times asked, so did you just make that up? And well, the reality is that it is only my truth, right? And so I've learned over the years to find a more and more balanced and less kind of defined stance on what I see as truth. I've stepped out of the realm of discussions and arguments around what is right, what is wrong, and leaned into more of the kind of meta concepts, I guess, meta truths, if you want to call them that. That there is no right or wrong in the universe. It's all experience and it's all perception. And but I've used those terminologies quite a bit to kind of explain things away as well. It's like, oh, that's just your experience, or dismiss things in that way. But in essence, I see that a lot of what we perceive as truth, that is both conceptually or spiritually or imaginably or even from a sense felt place, is based on a shared consensus usually. And so when we have somebody to corroborate our story with, and we get them to maybe side with our story because we're really convincing in how we tell our story, then it starts becoming professed as a truth. But in my time in Vanuatu, I had the privilege to sit and relate a lot with my beautiful brother, grandfather, father, just an archetype of so many forms, and teacher, Stephen. And he was very firm on the truth and what was just and what was unjust, because our cells know, our authentic inner knowing has an awareness of what is not so much right from wrong, but what is integral to the human experience and what is non-integral to the human experience, what is therefore natural to our human experience and what is not. And we've been, in my own reflection, very desensitized through all of this education and the cult programming and the exposure to all this socially engineered conditioning that is very long-term planning. I see that there's been a huge becoming desensitized. What a word! You know what I mean. I'm not going to stumble over that again. But what I sensed in that is that because we have become kind of almost numb to the trespass of sovereignty, the injustice, like, we see starving people in Africa and we go, yeah, well, welcome to planet Earth. That's life. This is what we all signed up for. But on a deeper level, there is a truth there of inner knowing that says, no, that is actually, it's with what we have as a capacity in our human family, knowing also that that is by design. It doesn't have to be like that. And I see that the big contrast between what we feel is truthful and what is therefore the opposite, charades or masquerading as truth, things that are actually in a indirect way, either deceptive or manipulative. Those coexist here on Earth, and that is currently totally coming out of the woodwork. And what's really interesting is that the word truth in its etymology is actually connected to, in its roots, to something of substance and solidity. And it's directly related to wood, to being of wood. That if something is of wood, then it can be carved and it can be shaped, but it has solidity to it. And so, as we are living this through this time and things are coming out of the woodwork that are not holding up to be the professed truths that they are, we are finding more of what is underneath that. And we can then say, well, what's underneath that is true. But I think the whole concept of truth is a comparison between someone's story and someone else's story. And landing more, as we talked about 2 weeks ago, in relation to our own inner truth and really finding a way to embrace that. I see that truth, in a sense, is a feeling based knowing that may be totally not true, but we can be very convicted in that. And this is what, once I see it that way, I can look around me and I can see a whole bunch of people touting and spouting and talking about their found inner truth, or their whatever they think is their truth, and seeing that they have really kind of come to speak from that place in order to also kind of convince themselves of what is really real and what's really going on. And I find it a fascinating subject. And a little bit back to Stephen, he said the truth is absolute. And I sat with that for a long time. Like, what does it even mean? The truth is absolute. And truth is one of those words that is best found or observed. It's a word for a state of existence that can be best identified by looking at what it's not. Because in and of itself, it's just an isness. It doesn't have a whole lot to say, and it doesn't have a whole lot to prove, and it doesn't have a whole lot to defend, and it doesn't have a whole lot to even be, because it simply is. And so in order to discover what the truth is, we're gonna uncover all the lies, and we uncover deception, and but it's a bit of a nice little wormhole to go down to.
Well, I'm sitting here smiling because as I'm listening to you, I just, you just said something about the inner truth. And what was really coming through was why we put so much emphasis on truth, because truth has become a confirmation. So you talked about the integrity of ourselves. You said we have an innate ability to know truth. What that means is we have an innate ability to feel what is naturally in what I call in alignment with life itself. And life is a constant forward moving energy. And so for us in human form, unfortunately, we have been so constricted and oppressed for so long that life that flows through us has only been able to filter out in measured amounts. And so there is this constant feeling within that there is more, there is more. And at the present time, what's going on is that we have an absolute knowing in ourselves what is integral to this shift of consciousness, to this expansion of the human form, this evolutionary process we're all going through. And so what is going on in the stories out there, the inner self is doing a sorting process of wanting something, that the story to come to us that is in alignment with what we already know in here. We don't know it up here, but our cells know this. There is, there is. When you say your truth is absolute, in our cell structure it is, because there is no confusion. There are no stories in there. That's all going on in the mind. So what's going on out there at the moment, as you were talking, I suddenly realized that people are desperate for the truth because the stories they see outside do not align with what they feel inside, even though they're not consciously aware of that they feel that inside. So they are looking for stories that are going to suddenly feel right or in alignment, and that are going to confirm what is already known in the inside of us. And then they know that as being true. So when we're looking for truth to be revealed, is because we're looking for answers to what is going on out there, which we know is definitely not promoting life. And therefore, we are looking for someone to give us a story that is going to support what we feel inside. And we're looking everywhere. You know, you and I have done it. We listen to this person and that person and some other person, and we go, and I have this filtering system, and I go, okay, is that confirming what my cells know to be true for me, for this life form? And I think that's what that is all about, this search for truth all the time. It is just a confirmation of what we already know instinctively within ourselves, even if that is unconscious.
So great, Yvonne. In my own soul searching for truth, I was blessed to come across syntropic agroforestry, and I made a beautiful distinguishment in this magical word called truth. Is that there's such a thing as living truths, and then there is human created perceptional truth, stories that we render into really neatly formatted narratives, and other people say, yeah, I believe that too. And there requires for truth to exist to be some evidence for that truth in the logical mind of humankind. Truth being absolute, it doesn't need any evidence. It just is. It doesn't need to be um, kind of corroborated in its existence by a third party to say, yeah, no, you are really real. For us, however, as I look back at to where a conversation starter around truth actually really begins, is that the truth has been covered up, has been muddled with, has been corrupted, has been veiled, has been obscured, has been raped, has been pillaged. The truth, the living truths of nature and the living truths of our human family being constituted to be a human family of love, not war and anger and all of these things. That there may be anger, may be a natural expression on the emotional level, but what we've been conditioned into and through and all of that is just a perversion of our original blueprint, our original and natural orientation as a species. And because it has been so long that it's been that way, and we call that his story, we kind of all been programmed to just take for granted that war and famine and all of these things are just part of human nature. They're just part of it. But through the study of syntropic agroforestry, it is an observable truth that the living strategies expressing themselves in life, in all plant life, in from micro organisms to macro ecosystems, the patterns of the universe, so to speak, are all the same. And so not only through that do they repeat themselves and do they appear to perform the same functions, and do these patterns reoccur again and again in different circumstances and events. Plant life is performing in the same strategical orientation that we can simply observe through time, and therefore say, well, you know, it becomes almost like the study of so-called science, man-made science, that when things are repeatedly performing the same acts and delivering on the same outcomes, we can say, well, it is true that a coconut tree delivers coconuts. Because consistently from our observation over the past, thousands of years, we see that that's really happening. So nature is a kind of like a confederation of living truths. It is a total smorgasbord of living truths. And I learned how to kind of elicit those living truths as living strategies, and kind of start looking inside of human ecology for the same patterns in nature, inside human nature. And in that, I did discover quite a few of what I would say notable awarenesses, but I could call them truths. But since we're talking about truth, I wouldn't necessarily tout them as such. But they are kind of rendered down to the original essence of who we really are and maybe what we are really here for. Syntropy has really helped me to come closer into that and find words that are way more simpler, or less used at least, than we are commonly being exposed to. And in that, what I've learned, where I started with, is that through the study of syntropy, I've come to learn how much confusion, how much distortion, how much, call it manipulation, but really how much thwartedness there has been through language put over, and that is what I call confounded in our language, put over our kind of consciousness in relationship to what is true and what is real and what is relevant and what is natural. And in order to retrieve the truth of who we are, the truth of what the human experiment is about, we somehow, in an unpleasant way, need a couple of guys to cover up the truth and put the weight on that kind of inner knowing of truth to become really heavy and really unpleasant for us to go and dig into that truth. And maybe I'm one of those that came here to be a little bit more sensitive than others, but I feel that that sensitivity threshold is being reached across the board in the Western world much faster now, because the pressures are, and the pressures being lies, deceit, overreach, trespass, violation, all things that go in against very simple truths. See, the truth in that sense is not complicated, if we want to use that word. But as soon as we put a word "the" in front of something, we make it a noun, and then of course it's not a living truth anymore. But I see that is happening a lot. I'm going to give it back to you, Yvonne, because I hope that you'll take that ball and throw it up.
Stir it up. Well, I want to go to the opposite of truth, and that is lies. You and I, we love language, so yeah, you have truth on one hand and lie on the other hand, and so we have been conditioned to believe it's one or the other, and but we don't live in a black and white society. We live in a grey place. So some things are half truths and some things are half lies. When I look at all of that, I go, okay, a lie is one of the words that I learned earlier in my journey of spirituality is incongruence, congruency and incongruency. And for me, that is, a lie is incongruent with what is naturally so, and a truth is congruent with my vibrational signature and resonance. But that is just for me, and it's only this moment. And really coming back to that being present and what is true for me and what is true for you. What I'm also learning as we're going through this time of ascension and time into a higher state of consciousness, which is really just a graduation into a higher awareness, is that the journey of knowledge going into a knowingness. And what that means for me is that what in the past I would have looked at with an analytical mind. An analytical mind means it does, it sorts and it compares and does all of those things, and it looks in the past and and it's supposed. And all of those stories go with that. But once it goes to critical mass, and this is what's so exciting about what's going on in the world, because we are traveling very fast to critical mass where all of humanity is going to suddenly go, hang on a minute, this is not the way that life is meant to be. And we are reclaiming the right to life in a way. Now, that's a good subject. We are reclaiming the right to life, which is actually quite funny because for so many years, people have been screaming when they went against the right for women to choose abortion. You had the right to life movement, right? Well, nobody's running around the streets saying the right to life at the moment when actually life is being squeezed out of us in so many ways. So the right to life is what we are working towards in a critical mass, and within us, when we get to a critical mass, it goes from knowledge to knowing. And once we have that knowing within us, that is the truth absolute for me. There is no question. I have no question. Yesterday, I had a beautiful lady that I was working with, and I was talking to her about this shift in consciousness, etc. And she looked at me, she said, "How do you know that?" And I'm like, okay, I can't give you an answer. I just know that. It has gone from the knowledge to the knowing, and once it hits the knowing, there is no need to explain it, to convince you of it, or it becomes a truth absolute for me. And that is something that I would like to offer people who are watching this, to look within and find the truth absolute within yourself. And that is the journey that we're all on, is that whatever somebody gives you as a story and wants you to believe that it is true, all you have to do is feel it in here and go, if I buy into that as a truth, does that feel good? Is that an opening up of myself? Is that a life forward moving experience? And if it isn't, then it might be your truth, but it isn't mine, and I'm okay with that. The problem is that we have made truth absolute in that we can't argue with it. If I say it's true, then it's very true, right? Well, it might be true for you, but it doesn't feel good for me, so I don't really want it to be true for me. And so that has allowed me, for instance, to traverse these 2 years in a world where whatever they're talking about doesn't exist. And people say to me, yes, but don't you? I'm going, no, it's not true for me because it doesn't exist in my knowingness, in my inner truth absolute. It doesn't exist. And therefore, I am not going to go out and then play with your truth. It doesn't make it right or wrong. It just means that it's not for me. It's not a truth. And to look for people to reveal truths of other people's lives, that is going to certainly come out, and it's going to then give you an opportunity to go and check back in with your truth. People are constantly looking for someone to give them a story that they can accommodate. They can accommodate and they can go, yeah, that feels right. Well, yes, it feels right because that's getting closer to your inner resonance, to your vibrational frequency. And so this discussion with you today for me is more about moving into becoming the true essence of who we are, which is an energy being. And the more that we operate in this world from that truth of being in a universe of energy, in a quantum field of infinite intelligence, when we can take ourselves out of the solidity of this third dimensional matrix and become first consciously this energetic being, then truth becomes easy because it either is or it isn't. There's never any doubt or any question because it's filtered into an energy system that either goes or goes and so you know which one to pick. Well, maybe you don't, but for me it's pretty easy. Um, and that is why I thought this subject was so great because I think that we need to look at it differently. Like we need to look at the world differently. We need to look at ourselves differently if we are to move out of this old, constricted, life stifling matrix that we've been trapped in.
So great, Yvonne. I like the observation that I learned as a practice to engage in syntropic agroforestry is to learn how to question the function. Because I came from as permaculturist for, I don't know, a decade, and still well, those are weeds. Put them in the category box of the weeds. And I learned later that you could also call them volunteers, because everything in life is performing a function with purpose. They too are performing a function in the very naturally and very organically and very in and of themselves. They don't require you to be the plant that they are to do what it is that they are doing and contributing to in the greater cyclical nature of of life. And I learned to transpose that onto pretty much everything. Okay, well, everything in life's performing a function with purpose, and so it it has been in the past challenging to kind of find the language to articulate the essences of what we may call truth. The inner awarenesses are just a feeling; they're not necessarily having a whole lot of language around it. It's just like, well, because I feel that way. That's the inner knowing expressed as a inner knowing, and that you could call a truth. But it's the word truth is almost like a step away from what simply is. And this is what I have noticed studying English more and more, is that it's very much a contract or a contracting based language, where if we boast strong enough around our truth, or if we manipulate the populace enough with all these mesmerizing little images and fake statistics and fake science, and but we make it all look really, shiny and shimmery, and we have presenters with pieces of paper in their hand that are just reading teleprompters that are written by people that they don't even really know where they're getting everything from, and nobody asks questions because everybody's too busy. And so we're in this like big run around machine, and taking that information in because they speak with confidence, because that's relevant. If you want to convey messages, then we have a lot of what you call buying into so-called narratives, because how could you not believe that? Because it's on the television, right? And so tell lie to the vision is a nice way to break that word up. I found that there is a lot of distortion that is being promulgated and spread around as if it is that truth. And in relation to questioning the function of that, I've really kind of come in a way to appreciate all of that distortion and all of that madness and all of that mayhem and all of the crazy and all the cray cray with it. Because for me personally, it has totally stopped performing a function with purpose. Because my cells were so my the story within around finding my own truth, which I feel is really the journey of every human being. You get born into a world that is broken. You get taken away from your original innocence. It all gets somehow shattered or deformed, or you're born into a war. You're born into poverty, or your parents die, or you have a car accident. We always have something here on Earth that comes in and gives us a huge imprinting that puts us into a certain trajectory as a result of that impact. And we therefore form orientations that attract circumstances and events into our lives that allow us in the deeper essence to kind of retrieve that which was lost, to restore that which was broken, to rekindle the love that was put out, or the inspiration, or the creativity, the fueling flames of our spirited nature got diminished. And so we're on this journey trying to find that. And I found that most often I found my own inner yearning to come home to those places very much kind of reflected in a mirroring format by the external authorities or the so-called powers that be that were lying to me, that were misleading me, that were stealing from me, that were doing all these things that were still stored in my own primary stories of who I was as a little boy. And I see in that the function that the what I call third party or the external authority that stands up is like, well, we're Channel 7 News, so we're the authority on news because we just called ourselves news. It's not even news. There's no news. They're talking about things that already happened, so there's nothing new about it. But we get that that's just been part and parcel of this whole kind of materialization of externalizing our soul searching into material objection and conceptual projection of a whole bunch of fantasies that have no basis in reality, so that if we do that long enough, we're going to be so disconnected from our source code that at some point that's going to come and bite us in the ass, so to speak. But it's really there to perform a function with purpose, so that we can feel how far removed we have gone as a collective. But I've really learned this, like, it's great to talk about the collective, but I can only do this for me. I can't make you come back home to you based on my perception of the distortion of non-truths and lies out there. Those lies and non-truths and the Faucis and the Gateses and the Dan Andrewses and the Bidens, whatever you want to call them, give them a name. They are archetypal characters that have performed a function with purpose for my cells to retrieve my parts and find those places inside of me that were either fearful of those guys, were angry with those guys, were dismissive of those guys, were quite frankly terrified of those guys. And so the external representation of untruth is really how much I've been living in untruth with myself, away from my own inner truth. And so once I learned how this reflective nature of the human experience for me outside of myself is just talking about inside of myself, I was able to come home and I don't have to be convicted in my truth anymore. Because the thing that I was doing, very much so, is I was touting my truth about pretty much everything that I had found. If it had anything to do with an evildoer or a bad guy or some government thing, and all of those stories were just reflective of my own absence of presence in myself, away from the inner knowing of truth. Because once I got to that place, I just end up being at peace. And so I see that for every individual, the search for truth outside of themselves, if they comprehend it in uh, its deeper, and it doesn't matter whether they do or not, because there's no right or wrong here in this universe, but ultimately it's a journey home. And I've learned that it's valuable to put some words to that, because I didn't know any of that. And so I had to kind of stumble and fall my way through that to kind of come to that place of peacefulness, and then be able to reflect and be like, wow, everything that has happened outside of myself in a negative light, in a harmful light, has just been performing a function to bring me home to being in a sense of knowing of truth, but no longer needing to promote it. And that's why I can now go on these little tangents with people, and then I will just say at the end of it, you know what? Just like this tangent that I just went on, I actually just made all of that up.
Oh God, I love traveling on your little tangents. It's so much fun. And all that comes up time and time again is it there is only isness, as you said before. It either is or it isn't. And this search for truth, it as you were talking, I actually came back to well, actually she was a little bit smaller, but this little girl, right? And I saw her as she was looking out of her bedroom window at the atrocities, that were in the street being performed by probably similar beings that are doing it today, and feeling that it was like that wasn't my world. It was so foreign to the loving being that I still knew that I was. And and so when you talk about it has, function with purpose, the function with purpose for me is for people to get in so uncomfortable in their non-truth, as you say, so far removed from their soul self, from their, what I call their vibrational signature, that it's a bit like an elastic band. You can go only that far away from yourself. I always remember in the early days when I first went on this journey, one of the first videos I watched was Point Zero by Greg Braden, and I laugh, I've still got the video, and he has had the most wonderful, he had a hairdo similar to you then. And and that was all about, we were traveling as far away from nature, from, as possible, and then we would get to Point Zero, and then we would be coming back. And so for me, that is what happens. We have come to this extreme of manipulation, and you can call it non-truth, whatever we call, the language. For me, language is ceasing to be less and less important, because it is the feeling of what really goes with it. And this stretching to the very extreme, as far away from our inner truth of our nature as we can possibly go. And that is what's occurred in this matrix. We have been pulled and pulled and pulled away from our intrinsic nature. And as you keep coming back to, the forestry, and we know that in plant nature that there is a certain amount of care and support that is needed for it to thrive. And when that when we try to manipulate, like all, GMO stuff that's been going on, and we modify what is natural. And I think that is exactly what's happened to humanity. We have been modified out of our nature. And as a result of that, we then have these atrocities of nature coming out that we then say, well, that's good for you. And well, that's another rabbit hole to go down. So more and more people are starting to recognize that we need to go to organic growing, organic products. What does that mean? It means that we allow nature to do what nature does best without interference. And for thousands of years, we have not allowed humans to evolve and to be in their natural state doing what they do best. And this morning I did a post on what really is coming to fruition more and more, and it's something that I've done in my work now for 30 years, is to bring people back to their authentic natural gifts and talents that they've come with, that are suppressed at a very early age in education, where you are told what you have to learn, and anything that you're good at, well, don't worry about that. You can do that in your leisure at some other time. And of course, then by the time you retire, you're too old to do any of that, or you've forgotten it. So we're all coming back and really finding our natural self. Our natural self is the only truth that really needs to exist. And that natural self has a propensity for a certain creative self-expression. And that is what's coming to the fore as people are walking away from their jobs to get a little bit of money so that they can have a little bit of food. They are finding that they're becoming more creative, and they're looking within, and they're going, I've always wanted to make this, and I've always wanted to do that, and then they're offering that in service. And it's such a beautiful, natural thing to grow. You and I were talking about it before, and I see that within our community here down the peninsula, where we have created this. Someone has created this amazing page called Mornington Peninsula. We are stronger together. Jab or no jab, and that Facebook page has now got, I think, something like 15,000 members. And in there, people are offering their services. They've all walked away from, and you go in there and go, does anybody know, I needed a gas plumber. Yep, here's one. And there's no in between. And so we're coming home to becoming organic, back to our nature, which that is the only truth that actually needs to exist. All the other stuff is manipulated truth. It is stories to feed you, to take you as far away from finding your inner strength and sovereignty as possible. Because once we move into our sovereignty, we don't need the other guy. We only need the other guy in collaboration and in encouragement and celebration and joy. We don't need somebody to tell us that we have to do it this way or that way, because if we're organically in our own truth and we are expressing those beautiful gifts and talents in service with an open heart, then we don't need the governments to tell us what to do. We don't need a health organization to tell us how to be healthy, because we'll be naturally healthy. And that really is what you talk about as absolute truth, is coming home to the organic human self and allowing that to thrive.
So beautiful how you lean into the modification that we've experienced here on Earth, and to discover, for me, truths. It really benefits to kind of travel up and down the timeline and really go back to a place where that modification, that alteration of the natural order hadn't yet been perverted, hadn't yet been altered, hadn't yet been modified, so to speak. Because when we are born into a modified reality, and I see it with the younger generation, they're born, like I grew up in a time when this thing was didn't exist yet. I never knew it existed, and all of a sudden there was this thing, and you have to type 3 times to get a letter, and then type 3 times to get the next letter, and if you did it wrong, you have to do it all over again. It was tedious. The first Nokia's, I remember those days, and I remember a world without internet. But the modified world that we are currently bringing new younglings into is, wow, exponentially gone more quote unquote technologically advanced, and that is having a successional direction. But I see that a lot of the modification of our orientations and our mentalities and all of that has been part and parcel of the social engineering that has been preceding that. It's like everything is just building on top of the next. So the 80s were a great period of insane elevation of consumerism. But instead of going at from decade to decade, because that's the period that I grew up, I like to look at this on the long stretch, and that the modification of the natural order, as you said, this is a story that is thousands of years old. This is not something that got invented just 100 years ago because a guy called J.D. Rockefeller had a ton load of unresolved trauma. It was full of demonic possession and decided that he wanted to go rule the world. No, this is going back way back in the days when there was this distorted fantasy of for out of vulnerability and not being willing to even go close to those feelings. Out of trauma was born these guys that suppressed and oppressed others and started saying, well, you got to go pay taxes, and because we're the human damage at the essence of it is really what is right there to kind of explain it all away, so to speak, but to give it a frame of reference, and that humanity's human damage has just transgenerationally increased itself in its diversity, in its density, and in its handover. And what I love about human nature is that although there have been hundreds of generations that have come and gone, and many wars and many pillaging and many, oh gosh, the human planetary screaming, if it was ever to be recorded over the history of thousands of years, would have been quite an astonishing orchestra of injustice, unlawful actions, whatever we want to call it, but just suffering, pure suffering of the human beings undergoing those treatments, those ways of being related to. And when we go all the way to where we are today, we have been kind of born now and stepping into a world that still is in dissonance with who we really are. And as I said, that's what I love about human nature, and the kind of protecting, but the intelligence in cellular life and consciousness in humankind is one would say that if you just hand over trauma again and then again and again, that by the time that we're in the 21st century, and you take that whole lineage and you look at all the wars and all the famine and all the destruction and all the bombs, and you're just going to say, well, we're going to just be totally disassociated as soon as we come into this world. We're going to be totally programmable as soon as we come into this world, because we're so traumatized that we don't know who we are, and we're just going to quite easily obey to the powers that be. And the truth of the story is, couldn't be further away from the truth. Human nature, from generation to generation, knows from within its inner knowing, what is natural, what is right, what is just, what is love, and what the things are that are not of that. And to me, in that, I have found a solace, and I found a comfort and a peace in the knowing that it doesn't take away my responsibility to do more of the homecoming within and dreaming into being the new earth that is beckoning us to dream it into activation. But it does give me a sense of like, Every single child born onto this earth, from already way back to all the children still to born, they are born with the same inner knowing. They are born with the same inner standing. It's just that, yes, right after birth, they start, or already during birth, they start intervening with that through all these westernized, standardized mentalities, fantasies, all based on fear and lack and control of life. And I get all of that. But the intrinsic and the innate foundational premise of human nature and the spirited nature that operates within these cells, the truer essence of the uncorruptible truth in cellular existence on our physiological level, will forever remain unchanged. Of course, there we're now in the process where even that is being thrown on the chopping board, and is being chopped up in the rather radical and excessive biological experiment that we are exposing the majority of the Western population to, if not the entire world. Um, I know, however, that that orientation and the fantasies that underpin that human damage, the distortions that are not of truth, they're not of love, they're not of harmony, they are of corruption and modification. Those fantasies are ultimately futile. And how can I say that for myself? Is I have leaned into syntropy. I have leaned into the infinite intelligence that I can see will remain forever in its own fractality, able to always be a step ahead of these Luciferian distorted operations. Because what life does in the process of being modified as a kind of unplanned circumstance or byproduct of the modification is that life becomes more intelligent. And so life learns more about itself. It not only remembers and retains its innate blueprint, even when it becomes modified, it then increases its intellectual awareness of what it is, and how it's still in connection to that original part of our own existence. And I love that about nature. I love that about life, that it's something that can be attempted to be perverted, but ultimately that is just performing a function to increase its intellectual resiliency. And I do feel that we are going to overcome with that, as a life essence, all the distortions that are being trialed and errored and played with.
Perfect. I am with you all the way. So I think we are coming towards the end of this conversation, and I would really like to end my part of it with knowing that what is truth, there is no such thing. There is no such thing as truth, but we can, and truth is a choice. It's a choice. Whenever you hear stories, you choose for it to be true or not to be true. And Sovereign, when you're talking about this life force and how it becomes more intelligent, of course, because that is the nature of the evolution of intelligence itself. So no matter how much it is modified, it always finds a way. It always finds a way to expand. That is what this quantum field of intelligence and consciousness is about. It will find a way. And interestingly enough, what is just coming through, and that's absolutely for me is a hoot, is that the more you attempt to alter it and the more you attempt to constrict it, the more it actually pushes against that to expand and become the greatest part of itself. And that is what we're now envisioning with humanity. the more it is being pushed in a corner and constricted. It is coming home, as you said right from the beginning. We are coming home to our authentic, organic, natural self, and we're leaving the outer world of trinkets and materialism and all of that. And now we're going to spend our time in beautiful time of introspection and finding who we truly are within here, because that is where our own individual truth lies. And that's an interesting oxymoron, this truth lies. But you know what I mean. English is a weird language.
Oh, isn't it, Yvonne?
So we're all coming to the point of whatever is your truth, if it suits you and it feels good, have it. But if it doesn't suit me and it doesn't feel good, I'm not having it. It is a
Mm.
choice. And it's coming home to our natural self. That is what this is all serving as a function with purpose. And I want to thank you for another fabulous exploration into a crazy subject.
So great. Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you for sharing. And everyone here, thank you for sharing this out. Post it somewhere that you feel
Yes,
it's
post it,
real.
share it everywhere.
So
We're
great.
creating a new earth.
I'll see you again.